If you're watching this video right now, comment where you're watching from, because what you're about to witness is a story about how a moment of prejudice and disrespect collided with greatness at 35,000 feet. When a wealthy businessman decided to mock the elderly black man in first class, he had no idea he was about to learn one of life's most powerful lessons. Delta Flight 1755 from Atlanta to Los Angeles started like any other first-class experience. The cabin carried the familiar scent of leather seats and premium coffee, the quiet murmur of privileged conversation punctuated by the clink of crystal glasses. Richard Maxwell adjusted his Rolex watch and straightened his $5,000 suit, surveying his usual domain with practiced disdain. The morning light streamed through the windows as passengers settled into their seats. Among them, wearing a comfortable cardigan and reading glasses, sat Hank Aaron. His presence was understated but unmistakable to those who knew, the kind of quiet dignity that comes from breaking not just records, but barriers. Sarah Thompson, the senior flight attendant, had recognized Mr. Aaron immediately. She'd grown up watching him play, had seen him hit that historic 715th home run on television. She moved through the cabin with extra attention, ensuring everything was perfect for the baseball legend, though he hadn't asked for any special treatment. Richard Maxwell's arrival disrupted the cabin's peaceful atmosphere. His voice, loud and grating, carried over the subtle engine hum as he argued with Maria Rodriguez about the vintage of wine being served. His seat was next to Aaron's, a coincidence that would soon prove fateful. Maxwell's first glance at his seatmate was dismissive. His second was contemptuous. "I think you might be in the wrong section," he said, not even attempting to hide his condescension. "Economy class is further back." The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and lingering. Hank Aaron looked up from his newspaper, his expression composed. Decades of facing down prejudice had taught him the power of dignified restraint. "My ticket says 2A, he replied simply, his voice carrying the warm timbre of his Alabama roots. "This is 2A. James Bennett, sitting across the aisle, tensed as he recognized both Aaron and the situation unfolding. He'd seen that number 44 jersey too many times, had cheered too many home runs, to stay silent. But something in Aaron's calm demeanor made him wait and watch. Maxwell wasn't finished. "Well, clearly there's been some mistake. First class has certain standards." He emphasized the last word while looking pointedly at Aaron's modest clothing. "I'm sure we can have the flight attendant sort this out." Sarah Thompson, overhearing the exchange, felt her professional smile freeze in place. She'd seen her share of entitled passengers, but this was different. This was Hank Aaron, the man who'd faced down death threats and racial slurs while chasing Babe Ruth's record, who'd kept his dignity through years of hatred and prejudice. "Sir," she began, addressing Maxwell, "I can assure you that Mr. Aaron is in his correct seat." Her emphasis on the name was subtle but clear. Maxwell, however, remained oblivious to the growing tension around him. "Mr. Aaron?" he scoffed. "What? Is he supposed to be somebody important?" His laugh was meant to invite others to join in his mockery, but the first-class cabin had grown notably quiet. The other passengers, those old enough to remember, those who knew their history, watched with a mix of disbelief and anticipation. Hank Aaron simply turned a page in his newspaper, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The same hands that had hit 755 home runs now calmly folded the paper's corner. The same eyes that had stared down countless pitchers now gazed steadily at his antagonist. Maria Rodriguez, though too young to have seen Aaron play, sensed the gravity of the moment. She'd never seen Sarah Thompson so protective of a passenger, never noticed such a collective reaction from the first-class cabin. She moved quietly to the galley and made a call to the cockpit. Maxwell, emboldened by Aaron's silence, pressed on. "You know, I pay good money to fly first class. It's about maintaining a certain environment, a certain level of sophistication." He adjusted his Italian silk tie, a gesture meant to emphasize the gulf between himself and the man he was attempting to humiliate. James Bennett gripped his armrest, knuckles white. He'd been at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium the night Aaron broke Ruth's record. He'd seen the grace under pressure then, and he was seeing it again now. But this time, the pitcher throwing heat wasn't on a mound, He was in an expensive suit with an oversized ego. "I've been flying first class for 20 years, Maxwell continued, his voice carrying the smug assurance of someone who measured worth in dollars and cents. "I know everyone who's anyone in these circles. And you, sir, are definitely not part of that group." The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. A younger passenger, not recognizing Aaron, had already pulled out her phone, sensing something significant was unfolding. Sarah Thompson had positioned herself nearby, ready to intervene if necessary, though Aaron's calm suggested it wouldn't be. Captain Mark Stevens, receiving word from Maria about the situation in first class, made a decision. He rarely left the cockpit before takeoff, but some moments called for braking protocol. He straightened his uniform and prepared to leave his post, knowing exactly what needed to be done. Maxwell was now fully engaged in his monologue about status and privilege, seemingly oblivious to the reactions around him. "Perhaps I can explain to you how first class works," he said, his condescension dripping like honey mixed with vinegar. "It's designed for people who've achieved something in life, who've made their mark on the world." The irony of his words wasn't lost on those who knew they were being directed at a man who had not just made his mark on the world, but had helped change it. Hank Aaron, who had faced down racist threats while pursuing baseball's most hallowed record, who had opened doors for generations of players to come, who had conducted himself with unfailing dignity through trials Maxwell couldn't begin to imagine, simply took a sip of his water. "And what mark would that be, sir?" Aaron finally asked, his voice carrying the weight of history. The question wasn't confrontational, it was almost gentle, layered with a wisdom that seemed to float right over Maxwell's carefully coiffed head. "If you're still watching, leave a comment about a time when you witnessed someone handle disrespect with dignity. Because what's about to happen next on this flight isn't just about putting an arrogant man in his place, it's about how true greatness often speaks softest, and how some lessons in life come at 35,000 feet. Captain Mark Stevens emerged from the cockpit just as Maxwell was launching into another self-important speech about his business achievements. The captain's appearance in the first-class cabin before takeoff was unusual enough to draw attention, but it was his expression, a mixture of reverence and barely contained anger, that made passengers take notice. "My mark," Maxwell continued, oblivious to the captain's approach. "Well, I'm on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. I close billion-dollar deals over breakfast. I have a summer house in the Hamptons and a winter chalet in Aspen." He pulled out his phone, apparently ready to show photos of his properties to his unimpressed seatmate. Sarah Thompson watched the captain's approach, remembering how he kept a signed Hank Aaron baseball in a special display case in his office. She had seen it during crew briefings, heard him speak reverently about the night he watched Aaron break Babe Ruth's record as a young boy at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. James Bennett leaned forward slightly, sensing the imminent collision of arrogance and reality. He wasn't alone, other passengers had stopped pretending to read their magazines or check their phones. The first-class cabin had become a theater of sorts, with Maxwell unwittingly casting himself as the fool in what was about to become a powerful lesson in humility. "You see," Maxwell pressed on, "success leaves clues. The way you dress, the way you carry yourself, the circles you move in. It's about excellence, about setting standards." He gestured at Aaron's modest attire. "Not everyone understands that, of course." Hank Aaron's response was characteristic of a man who had faced down far worse than an arrogant businessman. "Standards," he said softly, "come in many forms." His hands, the same hands that had launched 755 home runs into history, remained calmly folded in his lap. Captain Stevens reached their row just as Maxwell was about to launch into another self-aggrandizing monologue. "Mr. Aaron," the captain said, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin, "I apologize for the interruption, but I had to come and say what an honor it is to have you on board." The effect was immediate. Maxwell's face, previously set in a mask of smug superiority, froze mid-word. His eyes darted between the captain and his seatmate, confusion slowly giving way to dawning recognition. "When I was 10 years old," Captain Stevens continued, "my father took me to see you play. April 8, 1974. I watched you hit number 715. His voice carried the reverence of someone describing a religious experience. The way you handled yourself that night, through all those years, sir, you taught this country lessons that went far beyond baseball." Maria Rodriguez, though too young to have seen Aaron play, quickly pulled out her phone and searched his name. Her eyes widened as she read, 755 career home runs, breaking Babe Ruth's supposedly unbreakable record, doing it all in the face of racial hatred and death threats. Maxwell's complexion had taken on an interesting shade of gray. The man he had been condescending to, the man whose presence in first class he had questioned, was not just a baseball player. He was Hank Aaron, one of the most significant athletes in American history, a man whose achievements had helped change the nation's social fabric. James Bennett couldn't help himself any longer. "I was there too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The dignity you showed, Mr. Aaron, not just that night, but through all those years. The death threats, the hate mail, and you just kept playing, kept showing them what excellence really means." Other passengers began to share their own connections to Aaron's story. An elderly woman remembered watching the game on TV with her father. A middle-aged man spoke about how Aaron had inspired him to believe in possibilities beyond what society told him he could achieve. Sarah Thompson approached with a fresh cup of coffee for Aaron, her movements showing a respect that had nothing to do with first-class service protocols and everything to do with personal admiration. "My father kept every newspaper clipping of your career," she said quietly. "Taught me that real greatness isn't about what you have, it's about how you carry yourself through challenges." Maxwell sat in stunned silence, his earlier bravado evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The phone displaying his vacation homes had disappeared back into his pocket, his materialistic achievements suddenly seeming hollow compared to the quiet dignity of the man beside him. "Mr. Aaron," he finally managed to stammer, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have assumed." His voice trailed off, inadequate in the face of his own revealed prejudice. Hank Aaron's response demonstrated why he was revered for more than just his athletic achievements. "No apology needed," he said gently. "But perhaps we can talk about different kinds of standards, about how we measure success, about what really matters in life." Captain Stevens, who had to return to the cockpit for takeoff, made one last comment that crystallized the moment. "You know, Mr. Maxwell, when we reach our cruising altitude, I'd love to tell you about what Mr. Aaron did after baseball, his business achievements, his philanthropic work, his continued fight for equality and opportunity. Might give you a different perspective on what it means to make your mark on the world." Maria Rodriguez, having read more about Aaron on her phone, was fighting back tears. The articles detailed not just his baseball achievements, but his ongoing work in civil rights, his business success, his dedication to creating opportunities for others. The man Maxwell had tried to humiliate had done more to earn his first-class seat than most passengers could dream of achieving. James Bennett watched Maxwell's continued discomfort with a mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. "You know," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear, "I've been flying first class for 30 years. Never sat next to anyone who earned their seat more than Mr. Aaron has earned his." The other passengers murmured in agreement. The first-class cabin, usually a place of studied indifference, had transformed into a community united in respect for the quiet legend in Seat 2A. Even those too young to have seen Aaron play could feel the weight of history in their midst. If you're still watching, leave a comment about a time when you learned not to judge someone by their appearance. Because what happened next on this flight wasn't just about embarrassment or redemption, it was about how true greatness often walks quietly among us, and how the measures of success we think matter most are sometimes the ones that matter least. At cruising altitude, the first-class cabin of Delta Flight 1755 had become something more than just another luxury travel experience. It had transformed into a space of reflection, revelation, and unexpected connection. Richard Maxwell, the man who had started the flight spouting theories about success and status, sat quietly now, processing the magnitude of his misjudgment. Sarah Thompson had arranged the drink service with special care, making sure every passenger had what they needed. But more importantly, she created space for what was unfolding, a rare moment when artificial barriers broke down and real human connection took place. "Mr. Aaron," Maxwell finally said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance, I've been thinking about what you said regarding different kinds of standards. Would you be willing to tell me more? The question carried the humility of a man beginning to recognize the limitations of his own worldview. Hank Aaron set aside the book he'd been reading, a biography of Jackie Robinson, fittingly enough. His response was characteristic of a man who had spent decades turning confrontation into conversation. You know, he began, when I started playing baseball, I couldn't stay in the same hotels as my white teammates. Couldn't eat in the same restaurants. Some people thought I didn't belong there either. The cabin grew quiet, passengers leaning in slightly to hear Aaron's words. Even those who had been pretending to sleep or work on laptops found themselves drawn into the story. Maxwell, for his part, had the look of someone seeing clearly for the first time. But baseball taught me something important, Aaron continued. When you step up to the plate, it's not about what you're wearing or where you came from. It's about what you do with the opportunity in front of you. His voice carried the weight of experience, of lessons learned through challenge and triumph. Maria Rodriguez, who had been researching Aaron between her duties, shared what she had learned with other crew members. The stories circulated through the cabin, how Aaron had received death threats as he approached Babe Ruth's record, how he kept every piece of hate mail as a reminder of what he had overcome, how he had turned his baseball success into business achievements and philanthropic work. James Bennett added his own perspective. I remember reading about your business ventures after baseball, he said. How you became one of the first African Americans to own major car dealerships in the South. How you opened doors for others in the business world, just like you did in baseball. Maxwell listened intently, his earlier preoccupation with status symbols forgotten. I had no idea, he admitted. In all my business education, all my networking events, nobody ever taught me about that kind of leadership. Captain Stevens, true to his word, had arranged for the co-pilot to take the controls briefly so he could return to first class. He brought with him a baseball, not the signed one from his office, but one he kept in his flight bag, hoping for just such an occasion. Mr. Aaron, the captain said, would you mind sharing with Mr. Maxwell the story of the night you broke the record? About what was going through your mind when you hit that pitch from Al Downing? Aaron took the baseball in his hands, his fingers finding the seams naturally, muscle memory from thousands of games coming back. You know what I remember most? He said. Not the pitch, not the swing, not even rounding the bases. I remember thinking about my parents, about all the people who had fought for the right to be treated as equals. That home run wasn't just about breaking a record, it was about breaking barriers. Maxwell's education continued as other passengers shared their connections to Aaron's story. A young business student spoke about studying Aaron's business ventures in her MBA program. An elderly passenger remembered the pride his father, a civil rights activist, had felt watching Aaron succeed in the face of prejudice. Success, Aaron said, addressing Maxwell's earlier comments about achievement, isn't just about what you accumulate. It's about what you overcome, what you build for others, the doors you open that stay open after you've passed through. Sarah Thompson, during a quiet moment, shared how her father had used Aaron's example to teach her about dignity in the face of prejudice. He always said, watch how Hank Aaron carries himself. That's what real strength looks like. The conversation expanded beyond baseball and business. Aaron spoke about his ongoing work in civil rights, his efforts to create opportunities in both sports and business for those who had been historically excluded. Maxwell, who had started the flight bragging about his board positions, found himself taking notes. You mentioned earlier about making your mark on the world, Aaron said to Maxwell. But the real question isn't about the mark you make, it's about the path you leave for others to follow. Are you just climbing the ladder, or are you helping to build it? Maria Rodriguez, who had been moved to tears earlier by her research about Aaron, found the courage to ask him about maintaining dignity in the face of discrimination. His answer would stay with her for the rest of her career. Dignity isn't about how others treat you, it's about how you carry yourself through their treatment. If you're still watching, leave a comment about a time when someone's example taught you more than their words ever could. Because what was happening on this flight wasn't just about a famous athlete teaching a businessman about humility, it was about how real success stories often look very different from the ones we're taught to admire. Stay tuned for our final chapter, where we'll see how one first-class flight became a masterclass in dignity, and how sometimes the most important journeys we take have nothing to do with our destination. As Delta Flight 1755 began its descent into Los Angeles, the first-class cabin had become something rare in modern air travel, a community. The transformation that had taken place over the past few hours went far beyond the initial confrontation and revelation. It had become a lesson in humanity that none of the passengers would soon forget. Richard Maxwell sat quietly, looking at his reflection in the window. His $5,000 suit and Rolex watch, the status symbols he had been so proud of just hours ago, seemed to carry a different weight now. He had spent the flight learning about a kind of success that couldn't be measured in square footage or stock options. "Mr. Aaron," he said, turning to face the man he had so grievously misjudged, "there's something I need to tell you. I serve on several corporate boards, as I mentioned earlier, though now I'm rather embarrassed about how I brought it up. But next week, we're discussing diversity initiatives in our executive hiring process. Would you be willing to share your contact information? I think our boardrooms need to hear what I've learned today." Hank Aaron's response carried the same grace that had characterized every interaction during the flight. "You know, Mr. Maxwell, sometimes the most powerful changes start with simple conversations like this one. I'd be happy to continue our discussion." Sarah Thompson, who had witnessed countless first-class dramas in her years of service, knew she was watching something extraordinary. She had seen luxury and privilege, had served celebrities and CEOs, but rarely had she witnessed such a profound shift in perspective. James Bennett, who had been documenting parts of the conversation in his notebook, spoke up. "You know what strikes me? We talk so much about diversity and inclusion in corporate America, but too often it's just buzzwords. Today, we got a masterclass in what it really means, not just to include people, but to recognize and learn from their journey." Captain Stevens made one final appearance before landing, this time with something special to share. "Mr. Aaron, remember that baseball I mentioned in my office? The one you signed at an airport in 1975? I've kept it all these years as a reminder that excellence isn't about titles or positions, it's about how you handle yourself when the pressure's highest." Maria Rodriguez, who had been quietly absorbing everything, shared a realization with the cabin. "You know what's amazing? This whole flight, Mr. Aaron hasn't said a single negative word about anyone. Even when..." She glanced apologetically at Maxwell. "Even when he had every right to be angry. That's a different kind of strength." Maxwell nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in her observation. "I've attended countless leadership seminars," he admitted, "paid thousands for executive coaching. But I've learned more about true leadership in these few hours than in all those programs combined." The conversation turned to practical matters as Aaron shared insights from his business ventures. He spoke about how he had leveraged his baseball success into meaningful business opportunities, not just for himself but for others. He talked about the importance of creating pathways for those who come after you, about measuring success not by what you accumulate but by what you enable others to achieve. "You see," Aaron explained, "breaking Babe Ruth's record wasn't just about hitting home runs. It was about proving that barriers can be broken, that excellence can't be confined by prejudice. In business, I tried to do the same thing. Show that success doesn't have a color, that dignity and determination matter more than pedigree." Other passengers had joined the conversation, creating an impromptu seminar at 35,000 feet. A young executive shared how her grandfather had kept a scrapbook of Aaron's achievements, not just in baseball but in business. An older gentleman spoke about how Aaron's example had inspired him to mentor young minorities in his own company. As the plane began its final approach, Maxwell made a declaration that surprised even himself. "When we land," he said, "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. We've been approaching diversity all wrong, treating it like a checkbox instead of an opportunity. Mr. Aaron, the way you've handled everything today, the wisdom you've shared, it's shown me what we've been missing." Sarah Thompson, preparing the cabin for landing, overheard Maxwell making plans to restructure his company's mentorship program. The man who had started the flight questioning whether Hank Aaron belonged in first class was now eagerly taking notes on Aaron's suggestions for creating genuine opportunities for underrepresented groups. The landing gear deployed, and Aaron made one final observation that brought everything full circle. "You know, Mr. Maxwell, when you first questioned my presence here, you were actually giving me a gift. You created an opportunity for all of us to have this conversation, to learn from each other. Sometimes our mistakes, if we're willing to learn from them, can lead to our greatest moments of growth." Captain Stevens's voice came over the intercom, announcing their final descent into Los Angeles. But before returning to standard landing announcements, he added something personal. "Today's flight has been a special one for our crew. We're reminded that true first class isn't about where you sit, it's about how you treat others and the legacy you leave behind." As the plane touched down, Maxwell turned one last time to Aaron. "I came into this flight thinking I knew what success looked like. I'm leaving it understanding that I've barely scratched the surface. Thank you for teaching me what real achievement means." The other passengers, gathering their belongings, seemed reluctant to break the spell that had fallen over the cabin. Many exchanged contact information, determined to maintain the connections forged during this extraordinary journey. If you're watching this video, take a moment to reflect on your own measures of success. Are they based on what you own, or on what you contribute? On how far you've climbed, or on how many others you've helped along the way? Leave a comment sharing a time when someone helped you see success differently. Because what happened on Delta Flight 1755 wasn't just about an arrogant businessman learning humility, or about a baseball legend showing grace under pressure. It was about how true greatness often teaches its most powerful lessons not through confrontation, but through conversation. About how real success isn't measured in the luxury you can afford, but in the legacy you leave behind. Like and subscribe if you believe in the power of learning from our mistakes, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity, respect, and wisdom are the true markers of first-class character.